Okay. Thanks, man, and welcome everybody to our second steering committee to discuss the Hart Miller Island Community Benefits Agreement. I think we did introductions at the last meeting, so what I'll do is provide a quick overview of the agenda and go into the first item before opening it up to dialogue. So again, my name is Sidh. I'm a Deputy Administrative Officer with Baltimore County. On our agenda tonight, we're going to do a summary of public comments received to start since our last meeting. We will then have 10 minutes set aside for open dialogue amongst the committee before getting into what I would call key terms of any community benefits agreement and a discussion around kind of three terms that I think are the most critical. One being the sum of money proposed to support the agreement. The second being the allocation of funds between Hart Miller Island and the surrounding communities. And the third item to help define the term in the legislation that refers to communities in the vicinity of Hart Miller Island. We will then conclude with 15 minutes set aside for public comment, which of course is in addition to our website, which is accepting public comment on an ongoing basis. So I'll start with the first item, which is our summary of public comments received. And just a note from where we started in the last meeting, where I read each email verbatim. I'm just going to provide a summary of the comments we've received since our first meeting on August 22nd. And then again, point out that at this point, all emails that have been provided to the committee, along with other materials associated with the meetings, which include agendas and presentations and a video of each meeting, will be posted on our website following the meeting. So in terms of the types of comments that we received, I'd say, roughly half of the comments that we received were voices of some opposition to the redeposit of material at Hart Miller Island based on environmental concerns. And a couple quick things I would say just to kind of define our scope a little bit more clearly and the approval process for the container terminal project. So in this situation, both the reviewer and approver of the environmental aspects of the proposed container terminal project and the proposed redeposit of dredged material at Hart Miller Island is the Maryland Department of the Environment. We're charged with reviewing a community benefits agreement, and a community benefits agreement being finalized by the end of this calendar year is a prerequisite to MDE being able to approve the reposit of dredged material at Hart Miller Island. But our charge as a steering committee is strictly to inform the development of that community benefits agreement and answer key questions that we'll talk about tonight that relate to the amount of funding, the allocation of funding between Hart Miller Island and the neighboring communities, and the vicinity of projects that can be supported geographically by establishing a boundary. For those who are opposing placement on the island based on environmental concerns, we're happy to take your feedback. But I would say that the best place to direct that feedback is to the reviewer and approver, which is the Maryland Department of the Environment. So that was, a big chunk of the emails we received. The second tranche, I would call it, is just emails related to the projects and areas where there's desire for support. And two places that we heard about specifically were one, Fort Howard Park, in reference to the playground and sand volleyball courts. Second, we heard about a request for streetscape improvements on North Point Road. And then last, the Marine Unit for the North Point Edgemere Volunteer Fire Department at Shaw's Discovery is another item that we were alerted of. Last, we got one email that cited some issues with the meeting format from our first meeting, and I'm happy to kind of like talk through a couple things that I think we've taken into account and improved for tonight's meeting. So one, there was a comment just strictly about being able to post materials on the website. So at this point, we do have that taken care of. If you visit our website, there is a video of the last meeting, the agenda, the presentations that were provided both from the county's Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability, and Trade Point Atlantic, and the emails that were received prior to that meeting. We're going to continue to update this after each meeting, so expect to see agendas and materials posted shortly after we conclude tonight. The second issue that was flagged was the dependence on non-community member presentations. And so, the logic behind that was establishing a foundation of information from, A, the entity that's proposing placement at Hart Miller Island, B, the Department of Natural Resources, which is the owner of Hart Miller Island, and C, the county as the jurisdiction of record for the surrounding communities. For tonight's meeting, you can expect a lot more dialogue amongst the committee members about issues that are specifically relevant to their charge, which is informing a community benefits agreement. The last issue that was flagged was just that the public comment period was too short. The one thing I'd point out is we were actually able to get to everybody that signed up to speak at our first meeting. This is kind of the reason why we've done this in a redundant way, where we have both our website and a public comment period set up during the meeting. So if we're not able to get to you for some reason tonight, be sure to email, and your email will be posted on the website. So I'll conclude there. Before I move on, do the committee members have any questions or concerns about the feedback we received to date? And if not, I'll move on to our next item. Hearing none, I will go on to the second item on the agenda, which is open dialogue. And before I fully open it up, I want to acknowledge that HB 343, which is the legislation that has us here on this committee, references that any community benefits agreement must be reached in consultation with the Hart Miller Island Citizens Oversight Committee. The chair of that committee, who's also on our steering committee, Mr. Paul Brylske, is requesting an opportunity to read a prepared statement from the Oversight Committee that I believe was approved by the Oversight Committee. So, Paul, I'm going to give you that opportunity right now. Paul, you're muted.
That have been expressed by the community, and the potential of Hart Miller Island reopening the dredge. In over 35 years, the COC have oversaw the monitoring of the Hart Miller. There's not existed any environmental concern as a result of the placement of dredge material on HMI. COC will continue to provide oversight and monitoring the North Cell development and closure and potential dredge until it meets the legislative requirement to become part of the entire Hart Miller Island State Park. We continue to welcome all concerned citizens to join us in this effort. There's quite a few, and we understand that. As representatives of the community, we certainly continue to understand the risk of dredge placement, as well as additional risks of opening the North Cell to any dredge. We fought hard to close HMI through legislation. No community benefit agreement, no matter how large, would be worth threatening the current integrity of the island and the safety of the community. In addition to the Oversight Committee, there will be opportunities for the community to address environmental concerns in addition to the COC, which have been raised through which can be raised through the various permitting processes, especially those communities most affected by the dredge operations of the terminal. Certainly, the community, our Oversight Committee intends to do that also. So we need to keep in mind, as Shamir is saying, that the task of this group is to address the community benefit. But first, we'd like to outline and give you context of how the COC have attempted to address the CBA prior to the formation of this committee. Keep in mind, the focus of the COC since 2009 and the closure have been to implement the completion of North Cell so it can be turned over to DNR to become part of the state park. This has been a long, frustrating process. We're talking 15 years. The current Schedule D, for it to be completed, we were told would be $47 million, requiring 1 million yards of dredge material. So this was the first inkling of the committee thinking back in March that we should be maybe considering maybe opening the island, so to speak. We were contacted in March about the legislation by TradePoint, by Aaron. The initial draft was shared with us, and we, in the meeting with Baltimore County and with TradePoint, with Kristen and Pete and Aaron, we had three additions that we wanted in the legislation. One, that the COC would have stronger role in the community benefit agreement. This would be words we considered approval versus consultation. We wanted a clear definition of vicinity. We offered immediate vicinity versus vicinity. We also wanted clarification as to amount, which would go to Hart Miller Island. We wanted majority or 51%. Well, obviously, these are not in the legislation, we followed up with a correspondence, and I'm going to quote from the correspondence. The first priority, quote, the first priority for funding should be actions necessary to fulfill the implementation, and I'll paraphrase here, of option D, which is the closure agreement, which would also include uplands. Quote, this should be followed by all actions necessary to fulfill the goal of establishing a wildlife habitat, managed public recreation and educational facilities. The result would be a fully functional state nature park. Quote, also in that document, support should be provided to create enhanced accessibility through public and private water transportation, at least seasonally. Finally, a foundation or endowment should be created to ensure continued support for accessibility and promote future park enhancements. Later on, we quoted, as the nature park evolves, financial support should be given for enhancements to emergency services, law enforcement, delivery mechanisms such as fire, health, rescue, MES departments, county marine police, DNR police. Additionally, additional communication capabilities would be needed to be improved. Finally, it's quoted that the amount should be determined by the dollars saved by TradePoint Atlantic using HMI dredge capacity in lieu of pursuing alternative costs associated with creating a 100-acre new dredge containment area in Patapsco River. In other words, the money being saved by not having to build a dredge facility off of Coke Point should be the determining factor of the amount of money available. And the TPA, quote, should be required to commit a minimum of $50 million to the HMI initiative, with the final amount determined after final accounting of the money saved. This continues to be the expectation of the COC in the TCBA. So COC is going to moving forward to fulfill its role in completion of the CBA. We need to bring more, I think we need to bring more clarity to the process and decision making. And I think this begins by having a chair of this committee. And I put forward that we elect the chair, because we're going to be needing to make decisions. And I think we need to figure out, I think by having a chair and addressing Robert's Rules of Order allows us a structured way of making decisions. So with that, I will end our presentation. Any questions, or be more than happy.
Samir, I'd like to make a motion to elect a chair.
Okay.
I'd second that motion.
All those in favor, if you want to discuss it first and then take a vote.
This is Fran. I'd like to just ask a question. I think for the benefit of the other members on the panel, Paul, what do you envision is the role of the chair moving forward?
The chair would be to facilitate the meeting along, and certainly with Shamir. Is the assistance. We've had wonderful assistance, and it's been an unwieldy process. But I think we're to a point to make decisions. So I think facilitating decision making I think Shamir was real clear with 3 areas tonight that I think would require decisions to be made.
But to just expand, so in no way would it be used as a limitation on other members communicating with
Absolutely.
the committees and all? Okay, good.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Quite the opposite, I think. I think we'd be more focused in terms of getting the decisions made, more focused in our discussions, because we'd be more formally addressing motions.
Yeah, and I think the point about Robert's rules and having a voting member of the committee actually in a position to call for votes is probably a valid one and something to think about too.
Right. And we greatly appreciate your support getting this. I mean, we welcome this opportunity. I think it's really very mindful that and creative that you included all the members of the COC on this committee. And I think that really met one of our concerns we had was what is our role in consultation? How do we do that? Well, I think this meets that requirement. I think it meets the spirit of the law. So I think that was very, very mindful of you.
So I guess, do you want to vote on the existence of a chair first and then potentially nominate a chair second, or how would you like to do that?
Yes, you have to vote on the motion first. That's on the table, which is to elect the chair, and then we'll have nominations.
Yep. You understands there's a motion, a second, discussion, and a vote. And there's been a nomination and a second. So I don't know if there's any discussion.
We'll do another call for any of the committee members that would like to discuss it further.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing none.
Again,
None.
Paul, this is Gloria.
Yes, ma'am.
Again, can you elaborate the role of the chair?
The role of the chair, as I see it, would be to facilitate the meeting and to support us in making decisions and moving forward. And we, as we go on, there might be other roles that or would people want additional roles? Would that be enough? Or are there? It's a good question, Gloria. Were there other things you were considering that we may or may not do, may not want to?
Yeah, I was thinking about down the road, the future.
Gotcha.
Any further discussion? Ryan.
Yeah, right.
The members need to get together. I've suggested that if we can have a round table face to face, and then at that time, then we can do the nomination and elect our chair.
So
I agree with
Brian,
Brian. That sounds like a good idea.
Who just spoke?
Frank.
that was Frank.
Right. Yeah. I like the idea of meeting in person because I didn't know who just said that. And it's been awkward.
Well, if we meet in person without the county, does that count as a meeting where we have to have it publicly?
Yeah, that would still be a public meeting. So any meeting with, in terms of the Open Meetings Act, my understanding is any meeting with a majority of the committee members or a gathering of a majority of the voting members of the committee would be an open meeting and would need to be open to the public.
My concern, Brian, is we have 3 decisions, it seems like, that are critical for us to move forward, and we need to make those decisions tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And wait until the 16th, I think, would.
Samir's doing a fine job. I don't see why he can't handle this tonight, just as he has all the past meetings.
He's the ex officio member. He's not allowed to be the chair.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I can continue to help facilitate the agenda, but I think for voting matters, I do see value in having a chair call, vote, and take a second and do things like that. That would typically occur in a committee.
So
The only purpose behind this is to add structure to the meeting, like any other meeting that you would have in your communities. so that instead, like some of the emails that have went back and forth with people throwing out motions by email, that's not a right structure to run a meeting with. So in order to do this, you have to have some type of structure, which most county meetings are run by Robert's Rules of Order to a certain extent.
And this is the opportunity for, I guess, for anybody who would be interested in being the chair to nominate themselves. So, and
Correct.
I think how we would handle this is we'd vote on the existence of the chair first, and then second, folks could nominate others or self-nominate to be the chair.
Thank you, Brett, for putting that in order. Thank you.
It's hard to move forward without a chair, isn't it? So I'll just call for a
So-
vote. Or a discussion, I'm sorry, Gloria, more discussion.
No, that's okay. We were not doing and saying anything. I'm thinking that we should be moving forward. Continue to carry the motion through, have a discussion. We've had some discussion and we need to vote because time is of the essence.
I agree, Gloria, very strongly. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Are we recording? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
How about if we go back and say who
Let's go
we
in
are,
order.
but we say aye.
Yeah. So let me call down. So
Yeah, Samir, call a name and then a
That's what
vote,
I'm going to
Samir.
do. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the chat, the names in the chat are,
let me start with Brian,
Aye.
Fran,
aye.
Frank,
Aye.
Paul,
aye.
Josh,
Aye.
Gloria,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
and Sam.
Aye.
So that's 8-0 on the existence of a chair. So we have a chair. Now I think folks can either nominate others or themselves to serve in the function of a chair.
I would like to nominate Karen Wynn. The reason for that is Karen and Sam both do work in pretty much all of our communities, that they're generally in the entire area where a lot of us are singled out into small areas.
I'd second that.
Any discussion?
Will Karen accept the nominee?
Yes, I will accept it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
If
I'll do
there-
one last call and discussion, and then we can move this to a vote as well. Any further discussion?
I have nothing. I agree.
All right, I will do a call for a vote. We'll start with Brian,
Aye.
Fran,
Aye.
Frank,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye,
Josh,
Aye.
Gloria,
Aye.
Karen.
Do I vote? Aye.
Yeah, you vote, I think.
On this. Aye.
And Sam.
Aye.
Okay, Karen, you are now the chair. I'm happy to support, but I think especially for voting issues for tonight, I think I would give you the role of carrying those through, and then we can stay in touch for the next meeting.
Okay.
I think a good way to set this up a little bit right from the beginning, Samir, is you continue to do what you're doing of moderating.
Yeah,
And, Karen will be the one then, if motions are made, to
That's right.
second and discussion.
yep. I think that makes the most sense to me. So
Makes
I'm
sense.
happy to.
Yes, absolutely. I don't want your job, Samir.
Thank you. Okay. Any other items for open discussion, or are we comfortable with moving forward to kind of the discussion of key terms in the agreement?
I'm ready to move forward.
Okay. Hearing
Agreed.
nothing, we'll
I
go
agree.
into the what I think is the heart of not only the agenda for tonight's meeting, but really the heart of kind of the work that needs to be done as a committee. And so we have 15 minutes slotted to talk about 3 critical terms of the agreement. The first is the sum of money proposed. And so in terms of kind of discussing the sum of money, we didn't have, I guess, a number proposed at that point based on variety of factors, some of which relate to placement costs that would be assessed to the party dredging, which will be Trade Point Atlantic or a subsidiary of Trade Point Atlantic. Since that meeting, I think we do have some clarity on that topic. And so we do have Trade Point Atlantic on. Aaron, I don't know if you want me to turn it over to you or another member of your team to talk that through, but I'm happy to turn it over to Trade Point at this point to talk through the sum and kind of the logic behind the sum.
Sure. Thank you, Samir, and happy to have a conversation about the number. I know that's been something that the committee has been waiting to hear about, and we have been working over the last several months with the state, DNR and MDE, DNR and MES respectively, to understand the cost of placement and reactivating Hart Miller Island. So understanding those costs, I think, were very important to understanding kind of what the community benefit package could look like. And to give you an example of some of the costs that we're managing in this process, we're looking at the cost of doing the dredge and transporting the material, the cost of reactivating Hart Miller Island to receive the dredge material, and the placement cost and management cost over that time. And again, that's a conversation we've been having with the state. We're getting closer to a number that we feel is workable to be able to then share what we think the community benefit portion of the costs are going to be. Because the community benefit number is, in our mind, very much the total cost of placement for this process. That's the total cost as if we were to build any one of the other alternatives. That's kind of the factored in cost factor. As we look at the total cost of placement with what I've considered, and also the conversations right now with MPA, and DNR and MES on the final disposition of the north cell of Hart Miller Island. There is as pointed out by Paul, a $47 million commitment requirement for the MPA to fund the restoration of the north cell. We have on the table a conversation to fund anything above that that would be required to restore the north cell to the habitats that are being desired by DNR and the community. So that is, in our mind as a business, that is an uncapped liability that we're managing to. Just to give you an example of kind of scale of value, the conversations with the state have placed that around $30 million initially. So again, that's over and above a number that we're not sure of today. So with that in mind, we have identified $40 million to the community as the community benefit package to be discussed amongst this team here and determined how that would be appropriated across the neighboring communities. So that's a real number. That's a number that was very thoughtful. It took some time to understand the other costs that we're managing, and then also understanding the alternative costs that we have for placement. That $40 million is a number I think we feel very comfortable in sharing right now with this group. Happy to answer any questions folks might have on that.
I'll open it up to any committee members that want to ask questions.
Aaron, it's Fran. One question, please. So the $30 million that you've committed toward the closure and the $40 million for community benefit. So the $40 million is not coming to the actual physical communities. That includes the HMI benefit, right?
Now, the 40 million is the community benefit package that this process is discussing. And the closure cost above the 47 million that MPA has already for the North Cell is yet to be determined. It's been estimated in the numbers that have been floating around with the state. They have a $30 million figure that they put on that. That is yet to be determined number. Once the final disposition of the North Cell is determined and the habitat plan is adopted, and then obviously as we place material at Hart Miller Island, it will be driven to that end goal of the final disposition of the North Cell. So as we place, it will be a thoughtful placement to align with the closure plan.
If I could just follow up, I know you're having discussions with DNR. Are they comfortable with the figures that you're presenting to them and think they can work with that? As far as it's going to be a big long-term project to manage whatever we do out there.
There's still a number of outlying issues that we're working on with the state, but we've come to pretty close to some of the numbers and the process around those numbers. That is why we're able to share this number to you today. Again, it's probably a little premature. That 40 million is a number that if things hold the way we are hoping, that's the number that makes sense for the community benefit agreement, assuming everything comes together the way we're hoping and expecting for the state side of the costs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Gloria, I have a question. What happens if the cost goes over the estimated amount projected?
Well, we're trying to manage that. So that's why, again, we're putting that 40 million out there today because, again, there were two outstanding issues that we have with the state around some of the costs, and we're currently managing that right now. Again, we don't have a final agreement with the state, but I think we feel pretty comfortable that this is probably, hopefully, where we're going to end up. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Aaron, a quick question there with what you were saying. So the 30 million with the closure is over top of the 47. Is that what you're saying there, or it's out of, or the 30's out of the 47?
It was in our mind. It would be maybe over above. That's what their estimated costs are. We don't know. There is a $47 million obligation currently that has to be met for the closure, and we believe that our placement could drive that cost down potentially. So anything over what the state is already committed to, we're committing to covering, and that's in our mind, as we look at the business, that's an uncapped liability we're walking into this agreement with. The state in our earlier discussions had a $30 million figure to that, but again, that's with a lot of unknowns, and not working towards a placement strategy that would help close the site in a more cost-effective way.
You followed my question there.
Yeah.
Is that
yeah.
So the state, you're saying, has a $47 million obligation, and then the 30 is what they're saying over top of that is what you guys would either have to come into with the closure?
Well, that's the number that was put out much earlier. So what we're doing is we're trying to just get to a point where anything above the 47 we cover. And I'm trying to give you guys a sense of scale of what that could be as you look at that $40 million community benefit agreement. That's kind of a general cost. that that was floated. But again, there's not a lot of science or planning around that number, and that I think does not include like the strategic placement of material to meet an end closure plan.
I hate to ask the what if, but what if the state doesn't put up that original amount of money? Because I don't think they have in the last 10 years or better out there, if I'm following that right. The last thing we don't want to end up with is that we have nothing happening because the state's not putting up their end of their obligation.
That's what's been happening the last 15 years.
Yeah, and that's a very fair statement, Josh. I think with this project and the amount of the amount of interest in this project, I think it's good. It's shining a light on HMI, and it's going to force a decision. I just imagine you just can't have what we're doing happen and then not fulfill the obligation that you have. I think at some point, once we're at, and that's going to be several years out, so it's not an immediate obligation right now. That obligation is actually going to be pushed out a little further for the state while we do the placement. So the state has some room now to be able to come up with that money.
All right, thank you for the clarity there, Aaron.
Yeah, no, yeah, but it's a very fair question to ask.
And just as a follow-up question, this is why one of the reasons we wanted to steer away from that formula. And my question is, how much would it cost to build a dike you would need off of Coke Point?
Well, a lot of people have been coming up with numbers, and I think I've seen figures out there that taking the MPA tipping fee of $27 a cubic yard, right? And then if we were to have access to an MPA facility, multiplying that by 4.2 million, right? That's that kind of general number. And, that ranges at 113 million. If you were to do quick math on that, we believe we can do our program a little cheaper than what the current MPA rate is, including upland facilities and maybe offsite pier. We think we could do it at around $25 a cubic yard. So that's a little, the MPA's current number is $27 a cubic yard. And, we have working in an agreement with MPA to try to get that $25 a cubic yard. But even if you multiply that, that's the number you have. And that generally we know we can build our facilities cheaper than that. So it's all real numbers. If they start adding up, you get to why 40 million makes sense based on the other obligations that we're going to have with HMI.
So what I'm hearing though, Aaron, is that there's potential that 40 that you're saying could be less by the time we complete this agreement?
No, I mean, I think our 40 million is
okay.
40 million. That's what we put on the table for this consideration. So we're pretty firm. We believe that that's the number. So we're being very, as we have with all these things with the community, we've been very straightforward. And we wouldn't put a number out there if we weren't confident.
And Aaron, just so I understand this, and it because this portion of it might inform not just the work of this committee, but of future committees. So what I think you said was that restoration costs to restore the island will be picked up separate and apart from the $40 million that's going to support the CBA. So if, like, at a later date, we were having discussions about projects that were to be supported by funding in the community benefits agreement, the group is probably smart not to include projects related to restoration because Trade Point is paying for that in a separate form. Is that roughly right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's roughly about right. So I think that's why I think the 40 million from our team for the community benefit, again, is we look at it as, again, a business scenario, as we all talked about. And, that's what, that would be the 40, that's that savings that I think folks are talking about. That's the $40 million. That's where that $40 million is coming from, is that's the efficiency of using Hart Miller Island as opposed to the other scenarios.
Got it. And just for the good of the body, we have Richard Ortt, Assistant Secretary from the Department of Natural Resources, who just joined us and he's also an ex officio member of this committee. So thanks for hopping on, Richard.
Yes, Mayor, I've been here on the telephone. I just switched to the computer.
Okay, got it.
So I've heard everything that Aaron just obligated himself to.
Okay.
You know, Richard, we're close. You know that.
Yes, and because someone asked the question, you know, I think there's, as Aaron said, there's some details we're still working out, but what Aaron has communicated is what the state believes also. And while I wish I could say that's what DNR is negotiating, it's really a governor's office negotiation going on with all that. So I can't speak for the governor's office, but from my understanding, we are close in those numbers and everything else.
Got it. That's good to know. Any other committee members with questions or or even comments or discussion points related to this topic?
Thanks, Amir. I probably should have delivered that message with the beaming sun behind me, but I didn't. So thanks.
Good enough, right? Okay. If we're good with that, I guess the discussion on the sum of money, and I think, and I'll open this up to the committee if there's anything to kind of raise for vote at this point. I think, given that we just learned that information, there probably isn't a voting item there, but I want to make sure that there's dialogue about that before I move to the next topic. Okay, hearing none. The second issue that I have identified for discussion that's critical to a community benefits agreement is how we allocate funding between Hart Miller Island and communities in the vicinity of Hart Miller Island, which is language directly used in House Bill 343. I know there's been dialogue individually amongst some of the committee members, and there seems to be some support for separate allocations within, I guess, that pot of funding, which could be $40 million, with a split for Hart Miller Island related work and a separate split for communities in the vicinity of Hart Miller Island. There is some logic to that because Hart Miller Island, of course, is owned by the state and has an existing oversight structure that's referenced in the legislation, as opposed to the communities in the vicinity, which are under the jurisdiction of Baltimore County. And I know there's been some talk of kind of the number of that split, and 50-50 has been something that's been thrown out. So I'm just queuing it up to restate what I've heard from members individually, but I will open this topic up to discussion by the committee members. So I will stop.
Yes, Amir. In the last meeting, I had suggested this, and I'd like to at least hear some discussion on it. But that we get out of basically having to define the vicinity in this part of what we're doing, and instead make this simpler to where 50% of this went to HMI, and then 25% to Council District 7, 25% to Council District 5, and let them then set up subcommittees later to decide on individual projects. Which I can make a motion for that if that's what you want, but I'd really rather have a discussion amongst the group either way to hear what they think about that, because it gets us out of this problem of defining a vicinity that is not a very easy thing to define on this map, in my opinion. So I'll make that motion.
Is there a second or a desire for additional dialogue?
What was the motion again, please? Do the percentage split?
Yes, that's what I was discussing there.
I
What
think
was the motion? Restate the motion, please.
That 50% go to HMI directly, then 25% to Council District 7 and 25% Council District 5, which makes up the entire area that we've been looking at. And then that 25% later can be entertained with a subcommittee, with the councilman in that area setting up the subcommittee for individual projects.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what I was saying is this gets us out of the drawing a vicinity on this map and who is more impacted and less impacted, and all these individual projects that are coming up. I mean, we probably got a list of close to 100 projects.
It doesn't define anything. The only thing you've done is just broken it down into four or three components, but you haven't given a definition to, okay, the vicinity. You said the vicinity is the 5th district, or the 7th district, and HMI. And I think that falls short of what the public would ask for as far as what is the definition of the vicinity. The vicinity is a geography, not a district. Now, if we're going to say the district is the geography, then we're talking about people, could walk and say, hey, listen, we're in Grassland Park, or we're in, I don't know, the Fart's Extensive Rosedale, or whatever it is, because we're in that district. I think we should be right now, seriously considering what exactly, by definition, as Annapolis, I think, put on our shoulders to define. We've had over a month to do this, and we're still in this quagmire. Now, if you want a motion, I say we make a motion to define individually who it is and what community it is that is going to be in this vicinity. Thank you.
Scott, you were breaking up, and it was kind of hard to hear different parts of what you were saying. But my suggestion would be in those vicinities that we go off of this waterfront tracks. But I kind of left that open, that would be a decision of a subcommittee after. But I mean, if you don't want to, that's fine too. Like, I just want to have the discussion, at least, that we talk about this and see what everyone thinks.
I think
the discussion. I'm just saying I'm a little frustrated because we're going into like the latter part of this endeavor and we haven't even decided who it is that's going to receive the benefits. And I think it needs to be defined, in terms of names, not geography, but specifically names. And that's what I put forth. Thank you again.
Scott, Paul, I agree with you. I'm frustrated too with the definition of vicinity. Keep in mind my earlier point. Back in March, we wanted to find vicinity as immediate vicinity of Hart Miller. So thus the 50% going to Hart Miller. The other 50%, I think you have a good point. I don't know how facilities decided for the other community benefits. The other 50%.
Yeah, we're moving. Now we're down to $20 million to Hart Miller. Got it. Then we're going to say $10 million for the 5th, $10 million for the 7th. And I personally don't know how far $10 million goes over 10 years. What's that, $1 million a year per district? It's I don't know. I guess we could sell T-shirts and make that much money a year.
I share your concerns too, Scott, about the amount. Keep in mind we were asking for more, so that's part of the pie. But that's why we wanted.
I'm just saying, there's just not a lot to spread around.
Yeah, when it gets into dredging, it's not going to go far. The police boat, the fire boat is $1.2 million, and we've got a complex that's a shipping terminal, and I can see we're giving the volunteer fire department money to have a fire boat. We're going to have like a New York City waterfront, and we don't have the Thomas D'Alessandro fire boat out there anymore. That's up on York Road. So when you start breaking it up, I agree. We either going to need more money in the pot, and maybe Mediterranean can help up this a little bit. As to the 50%, Hart Miller Island is getting state money, and it's getting money that was already there. So of course, politically it looks good, 50%. But maybe we can adjust those numbers, or easier to satisfy everybody is up the pot. And I agree with Scott. It does not go far. It sounds like a lot of money to us as individuals on retirement, but when you start getting dredging programs and financing fire boats, it's going to be sucked up. It's going to be sucked up. It's got to, it should be.
I don't think there's anything that says that Hart Miller Island is by far the targeted vicinity of this and should at least be getting half of this, if not more, because that is the area that is getting all the dredge put into it. And we want to have a discussion about the rest of how it goes out into the community. But at the end of the day, the targeted thing that is being put there is on Hart Miller Island.
So I just want to jump in very quickly to clarify, because I think a couple topics are kind of getting merged into a single topic. So there are two kind of issues that we're talking about. One is related to, let's call the pot $40 million. A simple split between Hart Miller Island, which is a state-owned island and has a very specific set of projects that might be separate and apart from stuff that affect mainland communities. There's a separate consideration that Josh brought up about a split within the funding that goes to those mainland communities. And then a third and separate consideration related to mapping out the areas that could receive potential benefits. And so I just want to make sure we're kind of picking apart the topics, because it's easy for stuff to get confusing when we get into some of these key issues, but just kind of putting that out there as a reset. I think it makes sense to take these apart a little bit, one at a time. And so the simplest item, I think, before you is just the split between the island and the communities in the vicinity of the island. And then there are subsequent topics related to, defining how you split up money amongst those communities, and then a map that covers the definition of vicinity. Just putting that out there. Let me know if that is unclear.
Samir, also what was brought up there in that discussion, somebody said something about this being spread out over 10 years. Is that the case, or
yeah, let me clarify that. So right now, and this is kind of something that TradePoint may be able to provide some color to as well. They've indicated at least a preference related to kind of the pot of funding, which Aaron talked about earlier, in terms of a payment schedule that would mirror placement at Hart Miller Island, which I think is currently projected to end at the end of 2027. And so a placement schedule might occur, like if we did annual payments, it would be over the course of 3 to 4 years, and occur kind of following MDE's approval of the ability to place Hart Miller Island, and then follow a subsequent schedule after that. But the key is kind of mirroring the placement schedule. And Aaron, I don't know if you're still on and wanted to speak to kind of an idea related to a payment schedule.
Yeah, I think Samir, you got it correct. The intent is to mirror the placement schedule. So I think we're looking at 3 intervals. I think over that between when time we get permits and 2027, where there would be placement of dredge. So it would probably be stretched over 3 payments, if I'm recalling the placement schedule correctly. And that's just a factor of the dredge material, the timing that the dredging would need to occur, all of that.
Well, then we're talking $3.3 million a year over the course of this, or the terms of the payout, instead of $1 million over 10 years.
It would come in relatively quickly once we got permits. It would just, every time that we place, it would be tied to the placement.
So this is Fran again. So I think one of the things that we're missing here is one of the most important players in this whole process is going to be the council people. I know they've been on meetings or on now, they were on earlier. I think that it's really important for us to have a dialogue with them. We can come up with the best idea in the world and we can identify communities for benefits, but in the long run, they're the ones that are going to be approving this agreement. So I think I think we need to include them in this discussion a little more formally.
I agree. Yes.
And Fran, I'll point out that I think Councilmember Crandell has actually joined us. And I know has been in dialogue with some of you, so he is on right now if he wants to kind of provide any feedback from his perspective.
There we go. Hey, everybody. Our legislative session just ended, so I came on, I guess, about less than 15 minutes ago. So I'm missing the context of where you all started at 6:30. My take right now is let the steering committee do their job and continue to vet this out. Because what I'm hearing in the last 15 minutes, and then I attended all 3 meetings this morning and then one this afternoon, is that we're still awaiting some sort, like some details on exactly how this would work. So it is not my intention. I haven't spoken to Councilman Marks about this, but once there's sort of concrete things to actually wrap our heads around, and some of your questions, which I think are very valid questions, are answered. I think that's where David and I would become more involved in the process. And that was my intention all along. Yeah, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. I just think that earlier today, the biggest question was, what how much money are we talking about? And we couldn't really go further into other discussions on how the money is distributed if we didn't know how much we were talking about, and then if the vicinity wasn't defined. And from my understanding right now, that stuff is still not necessarily defined. But I will also say that if you go back to the legislation, the agreement would be signed by the Citizens Oversight Committee and Baltimore County. The council would approve that particular agreement. Am I accurate in that, Samir?
So the agreement would be, the way the legislation reads, it is between Trade Point Atlantic and Baltimore County, and to be done in consultation with the Citizens Oversight Committee. Consultation, of course, isn't defined.
Who are the parties to the agreement?
Baltimore County, and it's actually, I think it would not be Trade Point Atlantic per se, but it would be the entity that's the joint venture.
The JV, yeah.
The JV.
The JV.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the parties to the agreement. There's of course a requirement that the Citizens Oversight Committee be consulted, which is why, and Paul noted it earlier, we have, basically the entirety of that committee on this committee to account for.
With all due respect, not to beat a dead horse, but why not? We wanted a more involved, from the very beginning, we wanted more decision-making power. In addition to the fact that I was serious when I said the minimum that we expect is $50 million. We can't do what we like to do with the island if we split it 50, that does not give us what we need on that island. Okay.
What do you need on the island, Paul? I asked for the memorandum of understanding, and I'm still not getting it from MPA. They're talking about $47 million that we need to do something from Schedule D 1, 2, 3. I'm the only one maybe that doesn't know what's going on, but apparently it's $47 million. I don't know what's $47 million for.
$47 million is to prepare the island for closure. The state's on the hook for that.
What is prepare the island for? What do you mean? Fill it up? You know, hang lights? What do you mean
There
prepared
was
for?
there was a design that eventually got pushed through with a committee made up of MPA.
Can that be shared with all the committee members of
Sure.
this committee, or is it
Absolutely.
proprietary?
No, that's public. It's a public.
I asked for MPA 2 weeks ago for that information, and they told me I had to apply with a FOIA. Samir knows it. I asked Ortt, Mr. Ortt, okay, for the actual designs, okay, for what they got going down there, and they sent me some pictures, okay, with Sharpie arrows on it. I don't know if this is how things are done, but that's not what I call engineering designs that I would consider to be appropriate, okay, for this kind of scrutiny for this money.
For that's the reason I made my statement was when in March, when it was presented, the option D, that would have been cost to close it $47 million plus a million yards of dredge that would have to be part into that. And based on our estimates of what the savings the trade point would make, $50 million is a minimum, because we're saving them the cost of building another containment site. I don't want to get into the fact they'll have 2 more years of operations. So that's additional monies they will receive, that their tenant will receive, in addition to the profit that's going to be made. That to me was part. We're staying away from that. We're just saying, what would it cost to build an island off of Coke Point? Because they don't have to now. And so that's a savings should be passed on to us. It's not the way Aaron and the group is establishing their criteria. Our criteria would give us more money, we feel.
Richard, I think you have your hand up, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pappas, I'm sorry I sent you the 3 projects that you requested at North Point State Park. I did not see any requests for Hart Miller Island, but the North Point State Park, what we have, because 2 of them are still in engineering design, is what I sent you. So I apologize if they did not meet your standard. As far as Paul, I want to clarify that $47 million. $47 million is option D, which was the conversion, or what we would consider the restoration, to a state park. So $47 million. I'm guessing, Paul, time eludes me, but I want to say 5 years ago, that was the cost.
That's correct. It was 5 years ago.
And that was to turn it into a state park. So we have to be careful, because there's lots of people think different words mean different things. So closure and what we're communicating with TPA is not the same as restoration to a state park.
Thank you.
$7 million is restoration to a park so that we could open it up for park people to do park things.
Got it. Any other comments from the group at this point?
So let me get this straight. Closure is different than complete restoration for a viable state park. Is that correct?
Mr. Pappas, that is what in the engineering terms that we're using with TPA and MES, there is a difference between closure and what we're using the term restoration. Closure is removing equipment, working the crust, getting the crust to not be soup and pudding type material and turn it into, it's just dirt that you can use and push around.
Now, is closure $47 million?
No, closure is captured in that $30 million cost that TPA talked about.
So then where is the $47 million coming on top of the $30 million that we're already going to spend to close it?
The $47 million is obligated by MPA right now to take it from the closed perspective or a closed point to a state park. Now we believe, and TPA believes a different story, is that, and I'm sorry, I used the word story. TPA believes that they can do some more strategic planning to reduce that $47 million cost, to take it from what we consider closure of workable dirt to a state park. So, that may time will tell on that. But right now, we believe, in 5 years ago money, $47 million was what would it take to convert HMI to a state park when it's ready. And right now, the material is still too wet to convert to a state park.
So we got $30 million to close it, $47 million to convert it to a state park. And then in addition to that, there will be $20 million from the CBA that goes to HMI. Is that correct? Or am I still lost?
I think you're tracking, but I want to, because I don't want to put words in Aaron's mouth. Aaron's not on the hook for that $47 million. The MPA's on.
No, he defined that the state's on the hook for $47 million. My question is the $30 million that you just talked about for closure. So now we got $30 million for closure, $47 million for turning it into a park, and then we got $20 million coming from HMI for the CBA.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that and provide a little bit more clarity on that. I think what we believe is that if we manage the costs of placement and design a placement for during the time that we're placing material, we can bring that $47 million obligation down, because part of the Plan D required additional material into Hart Miller Island. So they're getting additional material to be able to manage into Plan D. That we're going to be placing more than the Plan D anticipated, but there can be an additional plan that will need to be created to manage a restoration goal that DNR would like to see to go into a park. So, you're working with the state's obligation, and then we will backstop that obligation with over and above those costs to fulfill the intended end result of Hart Miller Island, which is a workable park with habitat.
So when you're done with all the placement, we're going to have a park. Is that correct?
Pardon?
When we're done with your placement of the dredge material at HMI's North Cell, that will be then, a park. That will be a park at that point, because you have now fulfilled that $47 million obligation that the state is on the hook for.
The state's going.
No. Scott, maybe I could try to explain at least some of this better, because it took me a while to figure this out too. So it's very convoluted. The closure part of this that they're talking about is once the dredge material is placed on the island, then they have to put topsoil on top of that, plant grasses and habitat for wildlife and all. That was all part of the original plan from the very start 15 years ago. Now, this other parts that the COC is talking about a little bit on here is the infrastructure parts that are associated with that, of making that finished out as a park. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, if none of the closure part with the state end and TPA's end happened, you'd be looking at a wasteland of just dredge material sitting there with nothing on it. So like that 47 million number that came in before, that was part of making all the natural habitat out there, however you want to call it, the uplands. The rest of this, of what the other parts of the COC is talking about, of making this a working park, is the infrastructure. The fact that there's not good power running out there right now. There's not piers. There's not a way to get people out to the island. Those things to actually be able to use the park. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Now we're starting to, yeah. Okay, so what you're saying is that is $47 million that the state is now obligated to close it and then make it a park and then turn it over. It's done. End of story there. This $20 million will be, if you will, amenities on top of the wildlife habitat that was created and given and closed and everything else, by the $47 million that was expended to put the dredge material there and to put the topsoil there and to plant the grass and everything like that, to prepare it to say now it is occupiable for the public, for a park. And then what we're going to do is say $20 million is going to put, I don't know, bathrooms there and an amusement park or whatever we decide is going to go on there. Is that what I'm saying? Is that correct now?
I think that's right.
Correctly now?
Yes.
That was kind of why I asked about separating out the restoration costs from, kind of the amenities and benefits that could be associated with the CBA. Aaron, I'm sorry, I cut you off though.
No, I think that what he said is that's correct. And the CBA dollars is separate from the closure obligation. And basically what we're doing on the closure obligation in current conversation form is, once MPA meets their $47 million obligation, if it takes more than that to establish a habitat at the north cell and close the site, TPA is on the hook for that. We're the backstop for whatever additional cost above the 47 million that's going to take to turn the north cell into the habitat that is being envisioned.
Does DNR have the $47 million in their pocket now, or is the $20 million that we're going to get from the CBA going to go to that $47 million?
No, Scott, that 20 million is separate. It's separate. That $40 million.
First question: does DNR have the $47 million?
Not yet.
Yeah.
So
when will they have it?
That $47 million is an MPA obligation, a DNR obligation at this moment.
So MPA owes DNR the $47 million.
Right.
When is MPA going to pay DNR the $47 million?
Mr. Pappas, I cannot answer that. I would imagine that what we will do, because we have an MOU with MPA, is that
which I haven't gotten yet. Go ahead.
That the MPA will never transfer those funds. MPA will execute the projects themselves to turn that into a park.
Because it seems everything is predicated on all this before the 20 million is expended for the amenities of the CBA. So it's theoretically possible that it could sit there indefinitely until we all die, because nothing's going on, because there's nobody being transferred to finish the park.
Well, I think, Mr. Pappas, there's some things, I really don't want to give ideas to the steering committee, but there's many things that you may want to do on the island that is not dependent upon the inner dike of the north cell being full and restored. I've heard discussions, and I'm just going to say things I've heard, is, increasing bathroom space or developing a better bathhouse. Well, that's on the south cell right now, and you could probably put one on the north cell in the lower berms and not be in the way of the north cell. I've heard a recreation pier. I think that could probably be built without the north cell actually being totally finished. And again, I don't want to, isolate the things that I've heard from this committee, because you guys haven't really talked too much about these CBA activities, but those kinds of things could easily be done without waiting for that north cell to be closed and restored and turned into a park.
Yeah, I totally agree with Richard Ortt. I mean, I think, part of that 20 million that would go to the way you guys are looking at dividing it out, to HMI could amenitize the
Yeah, let me just say, I agree with that. And actually the CBA, the draft kind of itemizes that pretty well. But in terms of the 47, which you're right, Richard, we're talking 5 years ago. The state's been on that hook. We've been on the hook for that for ever since it closed in 2009. That's our frustration. While that's included in this calculation, to me, that is separate from the 20 million, which should be more. That's deserved in terms of community benefits. Okay. And Scott, I would definitely look at the options there. There's options are not what can be done now because of the new dredge, but that's kind of what we need in terms of we need, there's going to always be a place for water. We have to have a place where the water is going to gather and flow off that island. So it's got to be designed in that way. You want to minimize the amount of wetlands because you don't want phragmites, and you want to increase the amount of uplands, so it's a very complicated process that I think that the DNR, to their credit, have taken into account. And the money should have been there, and it hasn't. But that's separate, as I see it. So it might be part of the calculation here, but that's separate, as I see it, from COC in terms of what we need in terms of to make that island really usable in the way it should be available to the citizens.
So I wanted to jump back in and try and steer us back toward the agenda and at least making some progress toward some critical decisions tonight. And I think I'm just going to speak as an ex officio member, of course. Of the three things that are kind of out there, the one thing that I believe there's more consensus on than the other two things related to the map and then a secondary split amongst monies allocated to communities in the vicinity of Hart Miller Island is just the simple concept of half of the funding going to Hart Miller Island and the other half going to communities in the vicinity of Hart Miller Island. Wanted to see if that was at least one item that the committee would be interested in taking on tonight from a decision-making perspective, but I'll open that up to others. I think you're muted, Paul.
Brian here. I think that Josh brought it up a while back. We do the split, the 50% for Hart Miller Island, and then 25% for each councilmatic district that is in the watershed and the vicinity. So that makes sense. But then what Paul said, when you start working these numbers, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you start cutting it up with dredging and this community benefit and that, I think we need a little more money. I'm happy now. Give 50% the Hart Miller Island what they're going to do, but we got to get a bigger pot. Then our councilmatic districts will get more. And I know that's Aaron. I'm sorry, but the numbers, even in small projects here around the waterfront, it runs up, and that money is just going to be sucked away, and there's not going to be enough of it for our, to bring back to our communities. Done.
Got it.
I have no problem with the 25, 25, 50. Period.
Okay.
You want to take a second and a vote on that? I did make it a motion earlier.
I second it.
Karen, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do we want to vote on it? I guess we need to go through.
Well,
Paul?
Karen, have you been named chair?
Yes.
Okay, can I say something first?
Yes, please.
I think Samir might know exactly what I'm about to say.
Yes, I do.
So is it okay if I speak, Madam Chair?
Yes, but Samir is still the in
I
charge of
concur.
this
You're
meeting.
allowed to speak.
Okay, so I personally, look, I am not on board with 50, 25, 25 with the 5th and the 7th district. I would prefer that we look at, I'm not opposed to the 50% for Hart Miller Island, but if you're going to make a split between two different districts, that puts restrictions on what we might be able to do with the money if this thing ever comes to fruition. So I'm hesitant to get on board with. I don't have a vote on this. I understand that, but Fran asked me for my input, so this is my input, and I will say that the options that have been explored here with waterfront. A waterfront map as opposed to a per district map, because when you start talking about per district, we're looking at different lines where a project in the 5th district might benefit residents and communities in the 7th district just as much. But if the funding is used elsewhere in one of those districts, then one of those projects that may benefit both might fall by the wayside.
Good point,
Councilman Crandell, that's a good point. That was
that might not be necessary at this point.
Do you have a suggestion on how to do this, or we need to still get a definition of vicinity?
I brought up earlier. Why don't we go off of the waterfront tracts map that Samir gave us all earlier on the email? That the 25% has to go into those tracts. I think that would satisfy everyone that it's not going inland, then it's only on the waterfront part of the two districts.
I'd like to jump in and say, I'd like to offer a motion that 51% would go to Hart Miller and 51% would be determined based on the definition of vicinity.
Paul, do your math.
What do you mean, 50% to Hart Miller and 50% other?
It sounded like you said 51, but yeah, if you're saying 50-50, just to clarify.
I say 51. I probably meant to say that, but what I will say is 50% would go to Hart Miller, and then let's have the discussion about vicinity, because that's now more relative to the larger community. That way we can leave.
Agreed.
You can't have a second motion when there's already a motion and seconded on the table. Come on.
Okay, I got you. My name's not Robert.
But we had clarification with the councilman, which makes sense that some of these go across lines. I think Paul realizes that, and the rest of us, it goes across lines. So whatever Robert says, can we, work this out?
So the motion needs to be restated, because I also agree with what Todd stated. Because that's giving me quite concern.
Yes.
What
He
Todd stated
clarified
makes
it for
sense.
us.
Let's allow some flexibility.
Yes.
Yes. Well, then the motion needs to be restated.
I think so. The initial motion that's on the table is the motion that Josh made, and there was a second to that motion. So I think what would need to happen first is to vote on Josh's motion, and then it would need to be reopened back up for a subsequent motion that Paul just made, and then that would need to be considered separately. But
if you'd like me to restate the motion and add the waterfront tracks, if that's what everybody's after here, I'm fine with that. That's fine.
All right, we'll amend the motion then.
Okay, let me start back over again. 50% would go to Hart Miller Island, 25% Council District 7, 25% Council District 5, only in the waterfront tracks of the map sent to us today by Samir.
Does that sound, Todd?
I'm going to say right now, I didn't receive that map. Samir, I sent you an email saying that I didn't get it.
we should work that out. I sent it to you again. I did get your email. But maybe let's not talk about the maps then if you don't.
I think we would need to go over this waterfront tracks of this map to really make sure it's defined. So I really don't like that statement to be included. Like go
Samir,
back.
can you put the map on so we can see the map?
I got it. I can get it up.
Thanks, Tucker.
You're welcome. I could just talk through the methodology of these real quick. So in order to sort of facilitate this conversation, we had our BC Stat team here at the county, put together a couple of maps. There's two distinct methodologies we used. One was this one that we're looking at, which is just census tracts within Eastern Baltimore County that are on the waterfront. So those are the tracts in blue here. Pretty straightforward, right? It's from where the Key Bridge was to the Hartford County line. The other two sort of options we put together were based on radius from points of interest. So on this map, the one point of interest is Hart Miller Island, and then you have the concentric circles, the rings extending out from there. First ring is 3 miles from the island. Second ring is 5 miles. Third ring is 7 miles. And the last ring is 9 miles. Again, it's also based on census tracts. So the coloring is based on the minimum distance. So if there's a portion of a census tract within, let's say the 5 mile ring, then it's, that light green. If there's a portion within the 7 mile ring, it's that light blue, so on and so forth. And then we also put an option together that's with 2 points of interest. So it's the origin of the dredge material and then the deposit site. So Coke Point, Hart Miller Island, and we have overlapping concentric circles with the same methodology as the map I just walked through previously. So, but I've heard the most conversations with the waterfront map, so I'll use that one. as the committee continues to discuss.
The waterfront map that you have up there right now is the one I was referring to.
Right.
Tucker, just for the record, where the red dot is, the origin point of the dredge materials actually will be on the east side of Coke Point, not the west side.
Okay.
So it's actually substantial. That's about a half a mile or something in there. So it will affect your calculations.
Okay, that's good to know. We will, again, these are really just to sort of help facilitate the conversation.
No worries.
We will. Yeah.
Just want people to understand where the material is coming. It's coming from that inlet on the east side, down on the east side of Coke Point. Thanks.
A lot of area.
So this is Todd again. I forgot who was speaking. He asked me for, I guess, my opinion on Josh's.
It was Scott that asked you, Todd.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to respond to that or not.
I don't see why not. I don't think you're breaking any laws.
I don't see why not. You can.
Okay. Yeah. So Josh's motion still has district by district split in it, right? Because
that's how I understand it. It's just by waterfront now.
It's by waterfront, but his motion had 5th and 7th district, and I'm trying. What I'm advocating for is more flexibility than that, because we really don't know the actual geographic locations of projects yet, and won't for some time. So I'm worried if we say if there still is a split district by district, if we're not putting unnecessary restrictions on us in the future. If anybody's following me.
Yes,
Todd.
So I agree with focusing on the waterfront, and in the spirit of that, I totally understand and could support Josh's motion. However, I do have concern about the language with the 5th district and 7th district split, if that makes any sense.
Would you
Todd,
consider?
the reason I was doing this way, Todd, was that we get this into smaller groups versus one larger group. I mean, I don't think necessarily if you left this all the same way that folks in Middle River should be having a decision on projects down in North Point or Turner Station and vice versa. So the idea behind this was to do a fair, equal split so that the people in those areas could decide where they wanted that money to go to versus others outside of it trying to influence it one way or the other.
I'm not following you, Josh.
Josh, his reply is that there may be overlap, okay, in projects that may have interference or redundancy, okay, with the expenditures of the money, if I stand correct. And maybe that's where Todd was saying we need more flexibility. I mean, again, like I said, this is
Are
you saying you want it in a geographic way versus adding the 2 council districts? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is, do we need, if we agree that 50% should go to Hart Miller, 50% to go into either waterfront or whatever, do we have to define that location right now, or how it's split up at this moment in time?
We're defining vicinity right now. The word vicinity is left to our labor. We're trying to define that.
Well,
this is kind of all rolled together.
Okay, and I'm fine with defining vicinity on that, on the waterfront tracks. I'm fine with that, but then Josh's motion also had inherent in it, in specific language, saying that money would be split in the waterfront tracks between the 5th and the 7th.
And by virtue of him doing that, he is literally defining everything in that motion. He's going to define who gets the money and how much. I mean, it's implicit.
Well, that's what. But Scott,
I think
that's
we're
what I'm
limiting
objecting
ourselves. I think we're limiting ourselves with that. Todd has a great point, and I think that we're being tad bit premature to try to define all of that tonight. I have no problems with the 50% for Hart Miller Island. I think that we are being premature trying to define and split by district. I think we're being premature and we're going to bind ourselves into a box that may not fit when the real decisions come around.
I agree
So
with you, Gloria.
we need that flexibility, team, and it doesn't hurt to be open right now. So we will have an opportunity to work and look and really define. We don't have to do that tonight. Let's not be too premature. Let's make you. I have no problems with the 50% going to Hart Miller Islands, but I think we're going to lock ourselves into something that when we really go back in the subcommittee or whomever start analyzing this more, that we'll find ourselves into a box that we may not be able to get out of.
I think that's a wise statement. I agree with you.
I agree too. So what do we have to do? Do we have to vote down the motion that's on the floor for 50, 25, 25, and then go with Paul's?
He can restate the motion.
He can amend it, right? He can either amend the motion or
he can amend the motion now, and then we can carry it through if he chooses to amend it.
So I'm just going to throw this out, Josh. But 50% Hart Miller Island, and then the other 50% pending review by the committee of the waterfront tracks.
Sounds good, just the way Paul just said it.
Yep.
I could go along with that.
Todd, you down with that? Todd, are you okay with that?
Well, yes,
I mean,
yes, I think that I think that's fair.
The reason why I'm leaning on you, Todd, is because you and your colleagues are going to be the ultimate sayers and everything, and I don't want to cause problems now that you're going to have to revisit later in the future.
Oh, exactly.
That's why it's nice for you to be here.
Right. No, and I appreciate the thought that's that you all are putting into this. I just hesitate to say that there's a motion before the committee, and I am technically not a member of the committee. So your question kind of caught me off guard.
You're our councilman. Come on, stop it with the formalities. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, Todd, at the end of the day, this steering committee is advisory to the council. You guys are the last decision in this.
Yeah.
And Josh, this is Councilman Marks. I'm also one. So thank you all for participating, and I'm listening very closely.
Hi, David.
I think we could go back with what Paul made this comment to help amend a motion that's on the floor.
For right now, I will amend the motion that 50% go to Hart Miller Island, that the 50% staying on mainland will be done at a later meeting.
You need a second for that?
Yeah, I got a second right here. I second it.
Karen, do you want to call a vote?
I have a discussion if I can.
Yeah, any discussions?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're trying to reinvent the wheel here on the impacted communities. The original people who wrote the legislation, as far as placing material outside of Hart Miller Island, made that boundary 5-mile limit. I don't know, by saying just waterfront tracks, that's a big area. Those blue areas were big areas, and I asked Todd about. I'm glad Todd's chiming in on all this because it is really important. That's why I said it earlier. I have no problem with the 50% and 50%. That's not an issue. But I think if we're going to narrow down and vote on who can benefit from this money, I think that we have to focus a little more narrow. And that's my 2 cents. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
If I understand correctly, Josh is saying, let's say we're going to agree that 50% goes to Hart Miller. And then what he's saying is we're going to later agree on what shoreline communities will receive a portion of the other 50%. It's not that all of them are going to get it. We're going to then decide which ones get it at that point. Am I understood, or am I not understanding that correctly?
No, that's exactly what I was meaning.
Yeah, but
Thank
it
you.
wasn't stated that way.
So Josh, do you
Correct.
think
Thank you.
that this committee will decide that? Or is that going to be decided by another committee somewhere down the way? Just trying to.
No, my intention that our committee still takes up speaking and discussing further the 50%.
Which communities?
The shoreline community.
The 50% on the mainland, the community side from from HMI.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Is that okay, Fran?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we could probably not have to go through all that later if we did what's already been legislated earlier, but I'm good with it if that's what you guys want.
Do we want the current motion repeated, or do we know what we're voting on?
Repeat it, please.
Repeat it.
Okay.
Josh, I mean, 50%.
You know what? I'm gonna go ahead, Paul.
No, I was going to say 50% goes to Hart Mills Island. The other 50% is to be determined. Yeah, I'm not even going to put the tracks in there. We need to determine at a later date by the committee.
I feel like we can simplify this even farther. That I motion that 50% go to Hart Miller Island. That's it. Nothing else.
Well, yeah, we're going to have the discussion anyway about the other 50%. Because you're right.
Correct. That we still have to take up the other 50%.
All right, I motion that then. Second motion. Assuming that Josh just made a motion to have that voted on.
Yes. Karen?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I second it.
Go ahead, Karen.
So 50% of the money goes to Hart Miller Island. That's the vote.
And carry motion through.
Okay, so the vote is 50% go to Hart Miller Island. Oh, shoot. So I gotta go through. I'm sorry, my computer is doing something. Paul, your vote?
Yay.
Or should I do one by one, or do we want to do?
One by one.
One by one.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get off this. Okay, Scott?
Yay.
Josh?
Yay.
Fran?
Yay.
Sam?
Yay.
Gloria?
Yes.
Did I do Frank? Yeah, I did Fran. I did Frank. Frank?
Yes.
6, 7. And Brian?
Yay.
The yeas have it.
For the record, I want to show that it was a unanimous vote.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. We're obviously running a little late. I think this might be a healthy place to just take a pause and go to public comment and then pick up some of the other work at our next meeting on September 16th.
I thought you were going to say it's an appropriate place to go to the bar, but I'll go with the next 15 minutes.
We do public comment and then the bar.
Samir, before you go to the public comment,
yes,
I'd like to see if we have unanimous consent for a in-person meeting at the next meeting.
Is that a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I second it.
Samir, if we can't, have a location where all the public can be there, is it possible to meet somewhere and do for all of us on the committee to meet together and do a broadcast out, do the WebEx for the public?
it would have to be an open meeting, so I can say that. So you're suggesting a hybrid meeting essentially where the committee would meet and then the public could watch the committee and meet in person and provide feedback. Yeah, I think that's an option. We'd have to discuss the logistics offline, but that's certainly an option. We would just need a location, of course.
Can I get a motion now?
I think there was a motion in a second.
Okay, I second it.
Okay, so do we
If there's
need a
no more
vote?
debate, let's vote on it.
Karen, go ahead, Karen.
Okay. Paul,
Yes.
Scott,
Yay.
Josh,
Yay.
Fran,
Yes.
Sam,
Yes.
Gloria,
Yeah,
Frank,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and the yes, unanimous that yes, I think we would do better with a in-person meeting, whether public and whatever in the committee or just the committee and broadcast it out to the public.
Yeah, and we'll have to work through the logistics, I think, through the rest of this week, but happy to figure out what we can in terms of location and accommodating public access, of course, to that meeting. Okay. Any other dialogue amongst the committee before I open this up to public comment? Okay, hearing none. Tucker, I know you've been
Shamir, real quick, I just want to thank people for the support to Hart Miller Island, and we'll continue to work together to make sure that island's safe.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Tucker, do you want to call the first member for public comment?
Yeah, happy to. We have, just as a reminder, just like last time, we're asking folks to keep their remarks to 90 seconds or less. We have a sign up form available throughout the meeting. I have Joe Corcoran signed up, so I'm going to elevate him to the panel, unmute him, and then.
Corcoran, can I talk now?
Oh, are you on? There he is. All right, Joe, the floor is yours.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, so as far as the 47 million, that was determined a while back for turning what's there now to a state park. However, when we talked about this at a meeting with MPA, the final cost we determined was going to be closer to 100 million to do the same plan. So that's one comment I have. So we got to be cognizant of that. The second plan is I'm not confused. I'm a little confused about what TPA is going to do with that 30 million. So if it can't be done by 47 million, TPA is going to add 30 million to that. Is that what they're saying? Can they answer that clearly? As I'm not sure what that extra 30 million is, or are they figuring they can do the whole project for 80 million or 30 million, or what is TPA saying? What is that 30 million for?
Happy to answer that question, Joe. That 30 million was part of an initial estimate that came in the negotiations with DNR and MES on the cost of placement. So they had put a $30 million value on closure and restoration costs. What we believe in our current state of conversation is that once MPA has met their contractual obligation, their obligation to the facility, we will then step in and add any additional funds that are needed to get to final closure and restoration.
So the final closure and restoration is to get it to that Plan D, which was originally 47 million.
Yeah, or variation thereof, recognizing, of course, that placement of our material over and above the 1 million cubic yards that plan called for, it will alter that plan. So there's going to need to be a new kind of restoration plan contemplated, I'm sure. I'll let DNR kind of try.
But I don't think that 30 million is going to cover what we want. If we want wetlands and
So Joe, don't get caught on the 30 million. I'm saying that was the number that was initially put out by DNR. Our current plan is to fund over and above what the state's obligation is, should the cost of closure be above that. I was putting the 30 million out there to just give you a sense of scale of the kind of uncapped liability right now that we're current negotiations with.
I still don't understand. We can take it up later. I'll give you a call.
This is Richard Ortt from DNR.
Yeah.
That 30 million, and I think it's more than that, but I need to verify, and I don't want to get too focused on the number. But that 30 million is more like the operations of the cost to put the material into the island and to start the dewatering process, as well as to stand up the island, because right now none of the equipment's there to do the dredging placement. So that $30 million, think of that as operational money for putting the dredge material onto the island, and then a little bit of money for dewatering and getting that mud, jello type looking consistency down to suitable soil material.
So that has nothing to do with the 47 million then?
Nothing to do with the 47 million. So once that $30 million or approximate is spent to put the material there, then the $47 million from Port Administration comes in to convert it into a park. And what Aaron has said, and not to put words in Aaron's mouth, but if it costs less, that's great. If it costs more, TPA is going to backstop that so that they'll cover the rest of the money to get it into Upstate Park. And Aaron, please verify if I misspoke there.
Okay.
That's correct, Richard. And I think that 30 million, what we're seeing, there was an initial proposal by DNR and MES that had allocated a $30 million.
Right. So we need a plan of what's going to happen after the dredge is put in there. How do you know what your plan is until that dredge is put in? You got to have a plan with the extra dredge in there in order to come up with what it's going to cost.
And I think Aaron spoke to that is, there's probably going to be a variation to option D, because option D is based obviously upon current capacity or current volume, and putting 4 million cubic yards more material in there, there's going to be a little variation, but I think the goals and the concepts of option D are probably still within the desires of the Friends of Hart Miller Island and this committee and various others.
Right.
So
I was going to say, Richard, that's the role of one of the roles of COC, and that's an open meeting for all the public.
Okay. I'm sorry I took up too much time, but I think I still have a lot of comments about this, so I don't want it to go on too much further.
And Joe, we're happy to have a sidebar with you too, if that helps.
Okay.
And Joe, we're well over the 90 seconds, but we've received a lot of, we've received all of your submissions via email and, in the last meeting, but appreciate the back and forth Q&A, and happy to set up, additional time outside of this. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Just to make sure that the bird, they're going to be taken care of. They're not going to destroy too much habitat, and then that it will be restored, whatever's destroyed.
Thank you, Mr. Corker. That was Joe's the only setup we had this evening for public comment. That concludes the public comment.
Okay. Tucker, thanks for that. I want to thank the committee and the council members and the other interested parties for joining us tonight, and those who are able to watch and provide feedback either through email or out loud. Stay tuned. We will be working on figuring out the logistics for having our next meeting in person. We will do our best to hold to the current date and time, which is September 16th at 6:30 p.m. But of course, it's dependent on location. So hoping to be able to clarify that by the end of the week, but we will make sure we stay in close contact and get the information out on the logistics as soon as we can. So again, thank the committee members, thank the council members, thank the staff, and thank the folks that showed up that were interested in the process. Anything else for the good of the order before I bring this to a close?
I just want to thank everybody for all the effort they put into this. This is great. I really appreciate it.
Well, last thing that I would love to hear you guys say publicly with some clarity is that there is going around some of these communities that toxic material is going to end up on Hart Miller Island. And my understanding in the legislation and the way that Hart Miller Island was built is that no contaminated material can go out onto that island. Is that correct?
Us or DNR?
I guess I'm asking anybody that's in charge here,
Whoever wants
to put some clarity to this thing so that the public at least knows that that's not what is the case here.
To your point, HMI, it was built as a dredge material containment facility. Since the construction of that facility, the management of dredge material has evolved greatly, both in the characterization of the material and the public process involved on obtaining permits to place that material. So we're in a new kind of era now where that material that is being proposed is going to go through a rigorous testing. And we had committed to share that testing on September 17th with our community advisory board and members of this group. Many of you are already members of the community advisory board. So we'll walk through the environmental reports on the dredge sampling plan that was executed and agreed to with the regulatory agencies. And that will determine kind of what material goes to Hart Miller Island and what material doesn't go to Hart Miller Island. So to your point, Josh, yes, there is a rigorous process and criteria that the material has to meet. And we believe we're looking at a recreational reuse kind of quality that would need to be met for the facility. So that's yet to be borne out. The material results are with the two agencies with MDE for review. And once we have their review, and we'll be able to kind of share that with you all, hopefully by the 17th. But there is process, and there's a whole environmental permitting process that will have to be undertaken, both that will determine kind of how the material is dredged, where it's placed, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of permits that will need to be obtained.
Yeah, historically, I know there's the designation of levels of contamination, so to speak. The highest level being toxic, and is very specific. We could share, I'm sure Richard, people could share from MES, and there's never been any toxic material placed in Hart Miller Island, and they can never be, because that's the way it's designed.
Agreed, Paul. And I think the use of the word toxic is easy for people. It's just an easy, scary word for people.
It's yucky stuff, a lot of metals and things like that, but it's not toxic.
Yeah, Aaron, the reason I was asking that specifically is there's a misconception going on out there a little bit that this dredge material is coming from the Bear Creek Superfund site being put on the Hart Miller Island, which I'm certain we have been told numerous times that that's not the case. And that's why I was wanting to put that out there, since the public is on and listening, that they hear that, at least from you all and from DNR or whoever else that is involved.
Well, Josh, and the other thing is, I think this is the role, also the role of the COC. I mean, we need to educate the community and to help them understand and to invite them into the process, so they hold our feet and the Trade Point's feet to the fire.
Yeah, Josh, you're absolutely right. I appreciate you bringing up that question. And Gloria, who's on the call, can tell you all about Bear Creek and that project, which is a completely separate project from ours. So it's about a mile upstream.
And you're absolutely correct. And it is funded it is a Superfund site that has been funded for removal. And we should applaud EPA for funding it. So it's now talking about the process. They should be coming back to the public pretty soon, because the public comment section has closed. And then they will come back to the community to talk about how the process that they would take to clean the site. We have been waiting for years to have Bear Creek clean. So now designated as a Superfund site, and it has been funded, and it's totally separate from Trade Point's project, totally separate, not even in the same location, folks. So we do need to educate folks and encourage people to come to the meetings when the experts are presenting these things. Thank you.
Gloria, wonderful work.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments there, because to Josh's point and bringing it up, we've obviously seen some of that commentary related to toxic waste and so forth, and And that's clarity that I think is needed so that folks understand exactly what is happening here. I'll do one last call for any additional dialogue before I close the meeting again.
I think this has been a good meeting, a lot of good dialogue, and thank you all for you and your team for facilitating, and Karen for stepping up being the chair. Ern and our congressman, thank you all. Thank everyone.
Samir, can I say something? This is David Marks.
Oh yeah, of course, council member.
And I want to acknowledge your work. You all should know that tonight the council voted to approve buying the crane plant. And I know it's a little off track here, but it's going to be a great amenity for Eastern Baltimore County.
Yep. Councilmember, thank
Samir.
you.
You were a big
Thank
part
you
of
for
that.
your partnership on that one. That was a long haul. Yep.
So Southeast Baltimore is getting cleaned up. I like this.
And
Good.
thank you, Councilman
Yes.
Crandell, for your support as well, and all the community groups.
All right. So that's a positive note to end on. So I'm going to call this meeting to a close. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in person in a few weeks.
Again, thank you.